I'm pretty excited that my wife told me, oh wait, we're streaming that.
That's okay. We can catch up after. But yeah,
Great.
Austin's fun. I've been there twice for a conference. So I went. It was like an engineering conference, but then South by Southwest. So that was
Yeah,
cool.
yeah.
Okay, awesome. I'm gonna hit record, and then we'll get started. All right, welcome to Life's Not Linear. My name is Tara, and today I get to interview Devin. Devin, could you please give us your background, kind of a little bit of a high level timeline of your
Sure.
journey up until now?
So I am significantly older than I look, which that statement will make sense when I tell you my entire timeline. You're like, there's no way somebody who looks this old has done all that, but it's actually that I'm just actually old. So it's not. But so in the mid 90s, left NYU with I focused my studies on history, and I got out, and I've gotten in trouble with liberal arts professors for saying this, but I got out with a history degree and discovered that nobody hires people with a bachelor in history. Like, there is no job for somebody who's got a bachelor's in history. So really struggled finding a job. At the same time, I kind of really was finding my love for music. So I started DJing and got very much into music and the music industry and the music. And with the idea of being an internationally famous DJ who traveled the world DJing. Here's the problem. I was barely a DJ, and I was really not international at all. So I did not succeed very well with this plan, and ended up having a real hard time. I was homeless for a couple of years, was just unable to get a job, unable to pick myself up. And I was reading at the time Wired magazine, which everybody knows Wired magazine, but Wired magazine was this new experimental magazine in the late 90s that was just kind of amazing, was exploring subjects that nobody had ever talked about. And I started learning about this thing called hypertext markup language, HTML, and how it was going to revolutionize using this thing called the internet. Because up until that point in time, everyone had a CD-ROM, and you put in your computer, and then there's really loud screechy sound happen, and then you were able to look at chat rooms. And that was the internet, as far as you were concerned, was AOL. That was it. There was no other internet. That was scary stuff, like how we talk about Tor and the deep web. That's how we perceive the internet. And hypertext markup language allowed all of that to be significantly more approachable. And there's also a huge design element and a very much of a liberty of people's voices. So now anybody could be a publisher, whereas I used to have to go to a magazine and ask them if they thought I was good enough to write an article for them, which I wasn't. I had to go to a publisher to ask them if it was okay for me to write a book. So I went into Barnes and Noble and read HTML 4.0 for Dummies. And I could not afford the book. So I would go in every day and read a chapter of the book until they kicked me out. And I self-taught myself HTML and then started coding HTML and websites. At the time, I had a friend who was, I parlayed that into a sales job, selling online advertising. And then a friend of mine was working at J. Walter Thompson, and they were doing websites. De Beers was their client, and they needed a website. So he's like, you know this web stuff. It was like saying, we need somebody to do Snapchat. Like, it's interesting, it's relevant, but it's not everything that it is, So like, internet was not anything. It was this weird thing that like only a couple people did, and I had that skill. Just happened to have that skill. So they got me the gig doing web design and account management for the De Beers website. They were a monopoly. This is important because they couldn't do business in the US because they were a monopoly. And about halfway through the project, they went from 80% of the diamond market to 40% of the diamond market. So all of a sudden, they went from a monopoly to actually behind the eight ball. And so they expanded. They had been doing all these global websites, And all of a sudden they needed to pivot and transform what they were doing, and it became an e-commerce website. So we built one of the first international e-commerce websites. They would never have hired me for that job. Just to be clear, if they had been interviewing for somebody who can do an international e-commerce website, I never would have gotten that job. Keep in mind, 2 to 3 years before, I had been homeless. So at this point, the website wins a golden pencil. We've been doing these major infrastructure projects with e-commerce. It's a big thing. And I decided to go out on my own and start my own agency. And I started my own agency doing mostly fashion and music, because that was where my connection was. So I did the website for Frankie Knuckles, who was the first house DJ to ever win a Grammy. Fry Leather, 555 Soul, which was precursor to Brooklyn Industries. A lot of very interesting, if you knew fashion at the time, was very, very interesting brands. And I was really starting to pick up, and I basically was systematizing my hustle. I had 50 friends who were freelancers, who I would get a project and be like, ooh, I need a guy who's a database guy, and I need a girl who knows how to do banner design, and I had 50 friends who I'd call and be like, hey, can you do some banners? Stuff like that. And September 11th happened. And I went from 6 clients to no clients in a week. That was a shock to the system, on par with COVID, in that, like, it was just everything shut down immediately, at least for the web. And it was the shock that caused the .com bust. So whereas everybody needed a website in November of 2000, nobody wanted to even say that they had ever thought of anything that ended in .com by December of 2001. Like, it was just like this, it was verboten. So I struggled with that, and I ended up marrying my firm with, I met a woman who was a vice president of marketing for Madame Tussauds. And she really knew the tourism industry. And I really knew how to, I knew agencies, and I knew how to website, interactive design, and I knew all the operational side and the design side. She knew the market. So she was our salesperson. She was like one phone call away from anybody in the tourism industry. It was just absolutely amazing. So we ended up rolling up a whole bunch of really interesting clients. We wrote the marketing plan for the borough of Brooklyn. We were the agency of record for American Museum of Moving Image. We did the go-to-market plan for New York Water Taxi. We did the launch for the Statue of Liberty Ferry was launching a new boat called the Zephyr, which was a catamaran luxury yacht type of product. We did that. So we presented at the Arts and Business Council, which was a big deal in the cultural industry. And then my partner decided to leave and go into politics. And she was the salesperson. Just to be clear, none of these projects would have been achieved. It would have been gotten. It hadn't been for her, right? So I could deliver on them, but I didn't know who to talk to sell on them. So, and at the time that I'd been doing that, I'd noticed that there was this real issue that the cultural industries and pharmaceutical industries or life sciences are the same, that they're 15 years behind everybody else. So what you and I take for granted, they're like, that's magic. And you're like, it's not magic, dude. Everybody does that. Really? I've never heard of this thing called the VHS tape. You're like, what? Like, I was telling them how you could track from the online advertisement directly to the ticket sale individually and get a return on investment of your dollar all the way through. And everybody at the Arts and Business Council, like every cultural institution in the country who was at that was like on the edge of their seat, like, this guy's a genius. And I'm like, I'm talking about stuff that's been done for 10 years. What are you talking about? Like, this is not new, but they thought I was a genius. And I realized that there was this disconnect between offline and online. So I ended up joining a firm of web designers who had an interesting product for creating individual e-commerce landing pages for catalogs, which nobody wanted. But the people who did want this were direct mailers. Direct marketers were losing their shirt. because they had invested 10, 15, 20 million dollars in these huge printers because everybody needed printing. You had bills, you had classified ads, you had direct mail, which was the only way to get advertising out there. You had ads in magazines. All of this went away with the internet. So in the course of 5 to 6 years, all of a sudden there was no classified ads, there was no ads in magazines, there was no bills, there was really no direct mail because everyone was using email. And all these printers, what are called print service providers, are basically manufacturers who manufacture ink on paper, were stuck. They're all going to go out of business. And we had a software that was able to allow them to take the database that they have. I have a direct mail list of 10 million names and create a variable direct mail piece, which would be personalized to you, and a variable landing page, which would be, so we could track your individual response and personalize the entire user experience based off of who we knew you were as on that, what's called a flat file, versus how you interacted with us. So we struggled with that for the first 2 years. And because basically we were for the geeks who are watching this, it was on .NET and was basically an MS-DOS prompt. It was really hard to use, and all of my coders were like, well, if they're too stupid to understand how to use MS-DOS, then they shouldn't even be using it. And I'm like, you do understand that we're trying to sell this to people who are not coders, like, and they just were like, oh, no, I mean, I don't understand why anybody wouldn't be doing line prompts. And you're just like, but about 2 years in, Apple blossomed as a platform. It really hadn't been that important of a platform until about halfway through this company. And we had built this all for Microsoft. It was a downloadable app. It was super ugly. It was something that your parents would have probably been like, wow, this is really old, right? That's how it looked. And we were struck with this thing. It was like, all of a sudden, all of our clients were like, is it on Apple? And we're like, no. And we were losing clients. So like, do we recode this entire thing? We realized if we're going to recode it, we can just recode it and go and leapfrog the technology from going to Apple operating system to going directly online. So we created a software as a service company. And all of a sudden, a $20,000 price point became $399 a month. And we started systematizing all the things that were barriers to people using our product, buying our product, acquiring it. Nobody used it because they didn't understand how to use it. Great. We've got an agency that'll do that for you. And we've got a wizard which will allow you to pull these things out of this library, and boom, done. You got an entire landing page done. We got a WYSIWYG editor for websites. You don't need to know HTML. All of it, we started plugging these holes, and we went from 40 customers to 400 enterprise customers. These are like large enterprise customers. Ended up closing with Ara Donnelly. And that was like the big watershed moment for us. So I left there and I ended up going to Capgemini Consulting, which is a big French consulting company with about 200,000 employees. And there's a small strategy arm that focuses on Fortune 100 companies. And we would be basically the individual coach to a C-suite, to a CEO, COO, CMO, chief head of HR, whatever it might be, and we would help them digitally transform their business. I focused on customer experience because I've been doing that for 5 years. I've been training print service providers how to become marketing service providers and do one-to-one cross-channel marketing automation. So I started doing that for large companies like Audi, Aetna, Dick's Sporting Goods, stuff like that. So it was a fun time, but then I realized about 2 years in that I was really teaching Fortune 100 companies how to kill off Fortune 500 companies and startups. And that's not really where my heart was, where I loved, where my ikigai was in helping people to create a business that did something that everybody wanted, that somebody would pay you money for that made the world 5% better. All this was small business. So I ended up leaving to start a software firm called Juntobot, whose idea was to be a mobile app that would be a consultant in your pocket. So no small business can afford me as a when I was working at Capgemini. Like if I brought a project into my boss that was less than $400,000, he would laugh. He'd be like, absolutely not. It's not even worth our time to even think. And this is for a 3-month engagement, right? So pizza shop owner can't afford that. So how do you disrupt the consulting industry and bring that value to a small business in a way that they can afford and allows them to compete against big box stores and online? And I built this whole thing, and I did what I now tell all of my students not to do. I paid zero attention to my customers because I was a big 5 consultant who'd run 5 businesses. I knew better than them. I will build it, and when I build a better mousetrap, they will all come to me. So I spent all of my money that I got from Easy Pro, and I spent it on building this app, and I brought it to customers, and they were like, so I'm sorry, what does this do? It's like, so you see this as dashboard, and it'll show you the ROI on your entire inventory. So you can see the ROI on your tomato sauce, and you can like see where your ads would be, and then you can see where your important customers are and how they're changing. You can see, and he's like, yeah, I don't need that. I'm like, no, you really need that. No, I really don't need that. I run a pizza shop, dude. I don't need to know the ROI on my tomato sauce. I just need more customers. And I'm like, I'm just seeing my entire bank account going out the window, all right? And my work for 2 years is just going up in smoke. I'm like, no, like, dude, stop. I really don't need your dumb mobile app. What I need is an easy button for customers. If you can build me an easy button for, and I was out of business. I had wasted 2 years of my life and all of my treasure building this app that nobody wanted because of my own hubris. But during that time, I had met a lot of startups that I'd be at pitch competitions. I'd be pitching at incubators, accelerators around the city. And startups would look at me and be like, wow, you really know what you're talking about. Can you help me with this? And I'm like, I don't have time, dude. I'm doing my own business. Go find your own chief operating officer, your own chief marketing officer, whatever that might be. I'm trying to build my own business. When I pivoted, I realized I could do that for them. So I became an interim CMO, COO for about 5 or 6 companies, where I'd take 1% of the company and I'd take a salary that they could afford, and I would get them to their next level of complexity, from their seed round to their A round, from their A round to their B round, whatever it might be, from one person to 10 employees, 10 to 100, whatever it might be. I would help them with those processes and operational needs to get to that point. And then I met a friend of mine. I went to New York Military Academy, which is the military academy that our former president went to. And everybody there kills people for a living. That's what they went to military academy, and then they all went to the military. So I went to our 25th year high school reunion. Call back to the beginning of this where I told everyone I was really, really old. Yes, I went to my 25th high school reunion, and everybody there had something to talk about except for me and about 5 other people. And we're just kind of sitting there like after like the 3rd time I talked to a submarine commander, and I told him that I did cross-channel marketing, and he looked at me like I said that I breed unicorns. Like he was like, what? Okay, great, thanks. I gotta go get a beer, bye, and just like walked away. So like 5 of us were talking. And I meet this woman who worked at CNBC in the Philippines or in Southeast Asia. She was on the Southeast Asian desk in CNBC. Really cool woman, and Angela Chikara. And she was teaching at this program at the City College of New York called Branding and Integrated Communication. And she had asked me to, and so we started talking, and she was really interested in my background and asked me if I'd be interested in lecturing for one of her classes. I'm like, happy to. And while I'm lecturing there for about 1 or 2 semesters, and she introduced me to this program called the Zahn Innovation Center. So the Zahn Innovation Center is at the time was basically a business plan competition. And it was primarily just how you would spend 3 months like listening to a bunch of smart people talk about how important they are, and then you would see if you could get any bit of information to build a business plan, and then you would compete, and the person who had the best business plan won some money. My mandate was to build that into a serious program. So over 4 years, myself and the team at the Zahn Center, we built it into a program where it was actually a workforce development program, where you were building your first job, which was your own company, which was a company that was solving a problem in the world that was really, really important, and a big, hairy, audacious problem that needed to be solved. And you were either doing that in a for-profit way or a non-profit way. In hardware, software, we had a whole track for social impact, and we had a whole track just for women in technology to make sure that we had equity with, we had equitable level of women in the program. But we really started kicking butt and taking names, and we got to the point where we were actually 50% of the program was women in technology. Was it across all 4, not just the women in technology track, across all 4. This was before George Floyd. This is before Me Too movement, right? Nobody cared about this. Everybody was like, yeah. I'm sure women in the workplace is really a horrible problem. I got to go make money. And you're like, no, dude, it's really important. This is McKinsey in 2015 had done a study that showed that companies that had diversity in gender in their executive ranks were in the top 10% of earners in terms of companies. And companies that had a diversity of background, meaning people of color, religious, so forth, as well as gender, were in the top 3. Right? I might be messing those numbers up, but it was the research was there, it was obvious, but it was such a pain in the butt for anybody to do it that they didn't bother. And realistically, the problem was that you're taking 5 20-year-olds who don't know how to run a business and have just been given $5 million to run this business, and this is their chance to be rich. And they don't know anybody. They're just going to hire their friends. And that's who they feel comfortable with. They're just trying to get from point A to point B with as little conflict as possible so they can achieve it. So I stood up at a conference at 500 startups, and I said, I disagree with the premise that we need more diversity in technology. I say, if you want diversity in technology, fund diverse founders. You want more women in technology, fund female CEOs, fund African-American CEOs, Hispanic CEOs, LGBTQ CEOs, First Nation, First Gen, and let them hire their friends. And that's how you get diversity in the workplace, because you have diverse viewpoints, because diverse viewpoints have a higher ROI. So 4 years later, highly successful. I had the Dutch government, the Mexican government, all wanted me to work with them. The federal government wanted me, well, the House. So Congresswoman Maloney is the chair of that House Committee on Entrepreneurship, had asked one of her colleagues had met me at an event and asked me to help draft a bill for universal basic entrepreneurship. How do we support people regardless of your background, your educational background, your monetary background, so forth, to be able to be supported across the country to build a business, right? And I got a big head of steam and got excited and got backing from a major consulting firm that was not Capgemini, and a major bank, and left my 10-year job at City College in February of 2020 to start a business, encouraging people to get in a room together and start a business. And then COVID hit. Yay! So I got COVID at the middle of March, end of March, and I was in bed for 30 days, 2 weeks, really, really sick. And then 2 weeks just recovering from being sick. It was really like I ran a marathon. I was like recovering for 2 weeks from being sick. It was just wow. And when I woke up, my business partner, I got a call from my business partner, and he said, Devin, I've got 5 kids. I can't do this startup thing. I have to go back into corporate life. I got a job as a partner at a consulting firm. Like, hey, dude, fair enough. I completely understand. I respect your decision. No problem. Can I take the funders with me? It's like, funny story. They backed out. Like, we probably should have started with that. So it's been a year of pivots. I went from nobody wants to be in person, so how do we do this online? That was the first pivot. The second pivot was, originally we were going to build a better mousetrap. We were build a better incubator and kill off every other incubator. It was just going to be like the better incubator that nobody realized they wanted, but this would be even better. And what we realized was, when COVID really started to hit, the lights started going off in the startup industry. Like, all the ecosystems that supported the startup industry started going out. 111 in Canada closed their doors. New York Tech Meetup was struggling. There's just a number of different institutions. And what you don't realize is it's this web of support systems that support startups and an ecosystem that make it strong. New York City isn't strong because of Techstars or because of Civic Hall or because of Zahn Center or because of CUNY startups or because of the New York EDC. It's all of them together. And when those individual support mechanisms start crumbling, the whole system gets weaker. So we pivoted to be a platform that supports all of them. Taking the lessons I learned on how hard it was to do the job at Zahn Center, what was hard, I basically resolved in the platform. So that having been said, I can do this job anywhere. And Austin is where my wife's family's at. And the startup industry is popping in Austin. And everybody I met down there is super excited for me to come down there. So I don't know whether they're just being polite to me, but I'm super excited to go down there. And yeah, so that's where we're at now. Now I'm doing business with Aruba, with the Dutch government, with the Mexican government, with the government of Curacao. I'm doing business with my old stomping ground, City College in New York. I'm an adjunct lecturer there, and I'm helping them to build out an apprentice program within their engineering department called CPAS, which is to support African-American and Hispanic engineers in their first 2 years. That's when most engineers drop out. They realize they bit off more than they can chew. Like, how do we support them so there's less drop off at that point? Because once you get past that 2 year point, the drop off significantly reduces. So that's what the CPAS program is for. So I'm helping them to build that, and that's where I'm at.
Well, thank you for sharing. That is a lot. That is crazy. That all the twists and turns. First of all, I'm sorry that you had COVID, and I'm glad you were recovered. That's nuts. Yeah. And that's also crazy that you made that switch literally in February, like a few weeks. That's just nuts. There's so many things to touch on.
Yeah, I was telling somebody at the mayor's office, I was like, if you need anybody who can predict the next disaster, you need to embed them with me, because every time I start a business, a disaster happens. So I started my first agency right before September 11th. I started my first software company right before the Great Recession. And now I started my next big business right before the pandemic. I was like, the timing is just perfect. So.
Well, you were the most perfect person to interview for Life's Not Linear, because that's unfortunate, but you've also pivoted so much. So it's amazing to see how you've pivoted. I want to touch on when you were homeless for a few years, and like how you were able to keep motivation to go to Barnes and Noble and read, and to like keep teaching yourself. Like, how were you able to get out of that?
It was a very dark time. The thing about being homeless is that there's no lack of things to numb your pain, and there's no lack of experiences or substances to help you blanket the reality of your situation. And it takes quite a bit of self-motivation to do that. but it also takes a certain amount of desire to move yourself, and be self-critical without being self-destructive, because it's very easy for that self-critical that would motivate you to get out of the situation to turn it into a self-destructive loop. I blame a couple of people for my being able to get out of it. My great-grandmother taught poetry in San Francisco. My dad's adopted family in San Francisco are big in San Francisco. You know, like, I'm big in Japan. They're all big in San Francisco. And they helped create the experiential education movement in San Francisco. My great-great-great-great-grandfather, adopted family, they created a Temple Emmanuel. There's a lot of really interesting people in that circle that all did some really fascinating things. And it was all around education and around helping other people. She published like 7 books of poetry in the last 7 years of her life. She died at like 103 or 107, some abnormally long lifespan. And when the last time I saw her, I was very upset about something egregious my family was doing to me, probably like making me wear shoes or something, you know, like something little kids are very upset about, but it's completely reasonable if you're an adult. And she's like, Devin, who ever told you that life is fair? And I was like, well, nobody, well, other than TV and all my cartoons but nobody. And she's like, life is not fair. So you got to get over that and figure out how to make it as fair as possible, because life's natural state is not fair. So if you got to figure out how to make it fair, you got to be the moving force for fair, not the. So that was one. The other was when I grew up in Princeton, New Jersey, and my next door neighbor was this old man named Ashley Montague. And Ashley Montague was an anthropologist he was the anthropologist who discovered the Elephant Man. And he wrote the medical journal, the research paper on the Elephant Man that got turned into a movie. But I used to go over there and bug him. I was like Dennis the Menace. I don't know if you remember that cartoon. I was Dennis the Menace, basically. And he was the old curmudgeon. But yet he was not an old curmudgeon, and he would sit me down with anthropology books and explain to me about, tribes that he had visited and different cultures and all this stuff that I should never have learned until I was in college. I learned when I was like 8th grade. And this whole ability of self-learning, this whole engine of self-learning, he really is the one who, like, and from that moment on, I was constantly cutting classes that I found boring and going to classes I found interesting. I wasn't going behind the gym to smoke pot. I was going to poli-sci class. I was cutting English when I wanted to go to poli-sci. I was cutting biology to go to chemistry. Like, I was just reorging my own class structure. Of course, that didn't fly with the educators of the time, but it was all about self-education. So those two things really are what got me there. That and the welcoming arms of my family to bring me back into the fold. A lot of the people that I hung out with in the homeless scene were gay, LGBTQ. And they did not have a family to go back to. Their family had decided, they had come out and said, I am gay. And their family said, sayonara, get out. And we're talking about a 15-year-old kid. And he's out in the street. And these are the kids I hung out with, and they had no family. So they created their own family structures, but they had nobody to go back to. I had a family. I had a family who was willing to take me back and had the ability to support me as I got back on my feet. So those are the three, I would say.
Thank you for sharing. Yeah, it's okay. Yeah. They're great. Each one has a great lesson, and thank you for like sharing that with me and the people who will be watching this.
Yeah.
Because I mean, homelessness is a huge problem in a lot of different areas, and I think that we don't pay enough attention to it. And so it's great to hear like your experience of it and the experience of others as well.
Yeah.
So thank you. Kind of reflecting on all of your experiences that you've had and starting all these companies at the worst possible times. What is, and there's a lot of advice that you've kind of given, but what is like a piece of advice that you would give maybe high school students graduating today going into college?
The one most important piece of advice I would say that I'd give a high school student is, so this is the advice I gave my nephews, my niece and my nephews, when they graduated, was it's about experiences. Because whatever job you have is going to give you a list of experiences and a list of learning so that you can point to and be like, I did that. I would never have been able to start my own agency if I had built a website, if I hadn't built websites, right? I would never have been able to build websites if I didn't understand how to do HTML. And the only reason why I got into that loop was because I had a skill set that nobody else had. So all these kids going to coding camp, everybody codes now. Coding is the new literacy. If you don't code, you are illiterate. That's what people don't understand. They think it's a special skill that's going to get them a lot of money. No, it is now the baseline skill, right? So what is the unique skill that makes you different? My whole life, I've been the translator. I've been the pioneer who I've been the mountain man that shows the pioneers how to get to the promised land, because I've been there for 5 years. So for them, it's scary. For me, I know it. That's my whole career has been that. I've been that translator. That's the special skill I figured out that I had, is translating geek to non-geek and shepherding pioneers into unexplored areas. So I dug down on the skill sets needed to do that: design thinking, presenting, how to frame my ideas. This is a big thing that the really good schools teach you how to frame your ideas. You don't realize what they're making you take all these boring classes that you don't care about. But really what you're getting is an ability to frame your world and frame your thoughts and your problems in a way that are solvable. So like something like this book here, The Minto Pyramid Principle. Nobody's ever heard of this. I've never seen this taught in any class I've ever been in, or any class. This book, every single kid should read, because basically it teaches you how to structure what you're saying so people can understand it. It's written by a McKinsey consultant, and she is my like spirit animal. Like, she's amazing, right? So learning how to structure your problems, getting the experiences so that when somebody wants to take a chance on you, it's not a chance. So that's why internships are so crucially important, because every internship you get isn't a chance for you to be able to say, I did that, when you go to get your real job, right? And it's an ability, and the last is your network. I have gotten 0 jobs ever from applying on LinkedIn, Indeed, any of these. Never gotten the job. Every time a recruiter calls me, is like, hey, I want to talk to you. I'm like, get off my phone. No recruiter has ever gotten me a job. The only people who've ever gotten me a job is my network. So if I want to get a job, I'll call Humera Fasudi, right? She knows me. She knows my work. She'll recommend, right? I'll call the people I know, and I'll ask them to make recommendations to me to meet people. So I'm going down to Austin. What's the first thing I did? I called up a bunch of people that I knew and I said, can you introduce me to the important people in the Austin startup community so that I can figure out how to be as additive and supportive as possible in that community? That's going to allow me to hit the ground running there. So building that network is crucially important. Building the skill set and experiences and learning how to frame problems and solutions so that they're understandable by yourself and others is, I cannot tell you how crucial that is. So those are the three.
Thank you so much for sharing that advice and for sharing your journey today. I think not only is it super interesting to hear about, but I think students are going to gain a lot from this because it's not the things that are talked about in lectures, and our professors or mentors aren't always as like open and adventurous in sharing these things. So thank you again for being on Life's Not Linear today.
So every student who listens to this and gets value out of what I said, they owe me, right? But this is how I want to be paid. This is my invoice. We live in a karmic economy. There's a capitalist economy and a karmic economy. People who are like, I just want to make money. What's in it for me? That's the capitalist economy. There's nothing wrong with it. However, there's a whole other layer, which is the karmic economy, right? Humira asked me to be a mentor on her platform. Mm-hmm. I did it out of the goodness of my heart. I don't care what's in it for me. It's a great program. I want to be supportive, want to help. Great. That led me to be meeting you. And you asked me to be on this program, which is an opportunity for me. And what that will breed for me later on. I didn't do it because I thought I'm going to meet this woman I had no idea you existed. I did it purely out of the goodness of my heart. So what I say is, when I say you owe me, take what you owe me seriously and pay that forward. Do a solid to somebody else and feed into the karmic economy. Eventually it comes back to me, right? And eventually it'll come back to you. But that karmic economy, feeding into it, is so important. And if there's one thing we've discovered in the past 4 years is how fragile that karmic economy can be when you get beaten down day after day after day from these negative thoughts and these negative, but while it's hard to keep it going, it's very anti-fragile in that we all want to work together. It's just, there's less people feeding into it because everybody feels down. But, you know, I met Humira during certain presidents' during reign, right? And we still are in that karmic economy. Humira has never paid me $1. I've never paid her $1. We've always supported each other because we love what each other does, right? And that just leads to opportunities for our students, the students she works with, the students I work with. Great, which leads to another opportunity, which might lead to another. Maybe somebody who's important to me sees this video and is like, I really want to work with that guy. Great, fantastic, right? Did I do that? Did I do this because of that? No, I did it because it's important to get this word out, the advice out there to as many people as possible. What's the biggest lever I can make to solve my big, hairy, audacious goal, which is making the world 5% better. So.
I haven't heard the term karmic economy, but it makes so much sense. It's like, there are so many things that you've said today that have just like clicked. So thank you again for sharing.
Yeah, I find that there's moments when you discover something or somebody explains something and it's like an epiphany. And I never understood what the word epiphany meant until it happened to me. And it's like, there's a whole set of plates that are stacked and they're off each other. And then all of a sudden there's a little nudge and they all click into place. And you're like, got it. That's like, and like, getting those experiences is just kind of amazing because it's like, ooh,